In 1958, on an ordinary night in the state of Virginia, a 43-year-old American executive felt his body begin to vibrate in a way he had never experienced before. He owned a radio network, he was married, he was a skeptic, he was rational. And that night, without any warning, his consciousness abandoned his body for the first time. What he saw over the following 3 decades was so extraordinary that even at the end of his life, he had difficulty describing it in words. And what he kept to himself for years is exactly what you are going to hear now. This transmission did not reach you by chance. If you are watching, it is because some part of you already knows there is something beyond the physical body. Comment below with the phrase "Eu sinto o chamado" if you feel that this message found you for a reason. Robert Monroe was not a mystic. He was not a guru. He was not a spiritual master. He was an ordinary man with a suit, a tie, an office, and a schedule packed with business meetings. He was born in 1915 in Indiana and built a solid career as a radio executive and producer. He was the type of man who believed in numbers, in contracts, in things that could be touched. And that is precisely why what happened to him in 1958 destroyed everything he thought about reality. He consulted doctors, he had exams, he sought psychiatric explanations. He tried desperately to find a rational answer for those vibrations that seized his body before sleep, and for the undeniable sensation of floating above his own bed, looking at himself lying down. No doctor had an answer. No book explained it. And it was when science failed that he decided to do what no one before had done with that level of seriousness. He decided to investigate. For 37 years, Robert Monroe turned his life into a laboratory of consciousness. He documented more than 1,000 conscious out-of-body experiences. He developed a sound technology called hemi-sync, capable of synchronizing the 2 hemispheres of the brain and inducing altered states without the use of any substance. He founded the Monroe Institute in Virginia, where to this day researchers, military personnel, scientists, and curious civilians study what he called focus levels, the focal levels of consciousness. And here comes the detail that few people know. In the 70s, the CIA sent its own agents to study Monroe's method. The document exists. It was declassified. It is called the Gateway Process. You can look it up right now. They classified it, they archived it, and for decades they hoped that ordinary people like you would never find this information. But you did. And now, it is your turn. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night with that strange sensation of vibration in your body? As if a gentle electric current were running through every cell and were afraid to continue? If you recognize this sensation, listen carefully, because that was not a symptom. That was the portal. Have you ever felt, at any moment in your life, as if you were living the wrong life, as if there were a distant calling that you cannot name, but which insists on pulling you to a place you do not know where it is? If you recognize this sensation, then what Monroe discovered belongs to you too. Have you ever felt before falling asleep a presence in the room, not threatening, just present, watching, waiting? Have you ever had a dream in which you knew you were dreaming and for an instant everything became more real than waking life itself? Have you ever strived for years to change your life, repeated affirmations, read books, done visualizations, and the answer never came? If you answered yes to any of these questions, it is because your field of consciousness is already expanding. The signal is already arriving. The problem is that no one taught you how to tune into it. And here is the point that hurts. You can spend your entire life reading Robert Monroe, reading Dolores Cannon, reading Jose Silva, reading Joseph Murphy, reading everything that exists on expanded consciousness, and still remain exactly in the same place. You can understand the theory perfectly and never experience anything in practice. You can accumulate knowledge like one accumulates books on a shelf and die without ever having crossed the threshold. Why? Because understanding is not enough. The disbelief that blocks the signal is not an idea. It is an energetic pattern. It is a locked frequency. It is a hole-ridden field. And this is exactly where most people give up and blame the universe. But the universe has not failed you. It is your field that is leaking. And that is why everything you try to attract slips through the invisible holes of your energetic structure. The complete system to reprogram this field is in the first comment pinned below this video. It is called Imán da Prosperidade. It is not a book, it is not a theoretical course, it is a 28-day initiatory protocol that combines Monroe's principles on vibration, Silver's methods on alignment and coherence, and Murphy's mental technology on subconscious programming in a single structured path. People who spent years reading about manifestation without seeing any results started to see concrete changes in the first 2 weeks, not because something mystical happened, but because finally the field stopped leaking. What years of reading Monroe alone did not give you, the structured initiation delivers in 28 days, or you simply acknowledge that it was an excuse all along. The spots in the circle are limited because the guidance is direct. Access is in the first pinned comment, but before you go there you need to hear what comes next, because the next revelation changes everything. Because what Monroe discovered about the structure of reality cannot be told in a single video. He mapped levels of consciousness that he numbered as Focus 10, Focus 12, Focus 15, Focus 21, Focus 22, Focus 23, Focus 24, Focus 25, Focus 26, and Focus 27. Each level corresponds to a specific state of perception outside the physical body. Focus 10 is the body asleep and the mind awake. Focus 12 is consciousness expanded beyond physical limits. Focus 15 is the zero-time state, where past, present, and future coexist. And Focus 21 is the bridge, the threshold, the point where consciousness crosses into territories that most human beings only visit after physical death. Write in the comments now the phrase "Eu sou mais que o meu corpo físico." If this idea resonates somewhere deep within you, because this statement is not a catchphrase, it is an access key. When Monroe reached Focus 27, he discovered a place he simply called the park. It was not a metaphor. It was an environment perceived with absolute clarity, repeatedly, over the course of years. A place of quiet environments, green lawns, gentle structures, a sense of peace that he described as unlike any terrestrial peace. And there he encountered people he knew to be dead, people he had known in life, people who recognized his presence and talked to him. They didn't seem like ghosts, they didn't seem like memories. They seemed, in Monroe's own words, more alive than many people he met at the office during the day. They were conscious, they were serene, they were free from the physical limitations they carried in life. And the phrase he repeated countless times in his books is a phrase that deserves silence before being heard. Death did not seem like an end. It seemed like a transition. Deeper than the park, Monroe described 3 centers he found at even higher levels of consciousness. An education center, where souls reviewed their life experiences, not as judgment, but as learning. A planning center, where future incarnations were prepared and where soul contracts were drawn up before birth. And a healing center, where souls exhausted by the earthly passage recovered energetic coherence. You can choose to believe it or not. But what you need to understand is that Monroe was not alone in describing this. Dolores Cannon, who spent 45 years performing deep hypnotic regression on thousands of people, independently described, with patients who had never heard of Monroe, exactly the same territories, the same centers, the same functions, the same structure. When 2 independent studies conducted in different decades with different methodologies describe the same landscape, something interesting is happening. And it was deeper than that Monroe found what he perhaps never managed to describe fully. At even higher levels, he observed what he called the gathering. Thousands of intelligences, according to him, positioned around Earth, observing. They were not human, they did not belong to this system, they were attentive, they were waiting. And the question he took to his grave is the question that even today the researchers at the Monroe Institute discuss in low voices. What were they observing? According to Monroe, they were observing a transition, not the past of humanity, its transformation, an evolutionary leap of collective frequency unprecedented in the history of this planet. And he stated with the cold calm of a researcher that this event was not distant. It was happening now. This is where the story gets uncomfortable, because if Monroe was right, then everything you were taught about Earth is an incomplete version. Earth, according to what he understood in his last years of research, is not simply a planet. It is a school. It is a high-density learning system designed for consciousness to experience contrast, difficulty, choice, pain, love, loss, and growth in an intensity that does not exist in other levels. The difficult experiences you went through in your life, according to this lens, were not accidents of the universe. They were curriculum. They were contract. They were, at some level prior to your birth, your choice. And this is exactly the type of information that those who profit from your fear, those who need you asleep, those who benefit from your disconnection from the source itself, have spent decades trying to keep out of your reach, because a human being who remembers who they are is a human being who can no longer be controlled by fear. And what Monroe found at the deepest level of all was what impacted him the most. He discovered, and this word is his, discovered, that under all phenomena, under all levels, under all structures of consciousness, existed a fundamental substance. It was not energy in the physical sense. It was not information in the digital sense. It was what he called, with hesitation, love. Not romantic love, not sentimental love, but a fundamental property of the fabric of reality. Something that was everywhere. Something that constituted the substrate from which everything else was made. He wrote, and this phrase you can write down now, under all experiences exists a structure based on love. You are not your body. You are the consciousness that inhabits it, and that consciousness is made of the same substance that constitutes the source. In the last years of his life, Monroe began to talk about an experience he was reluctant to describe. He called it simply home. It was not a place. It had no geography. It was a state of recognition. It was the instant in which his consciousness remembered where it had come from before entering this body, before this birth, before this life. And he described, with a choked voice in his last interviews, that this recognition was the most real thing he had ever experienced, more real than any moment in physical life. And it was at this point that he lost once and for all the fear of death, because he had already crossed the threshold more than 1,000 times, and every time, without exception, he had found continuity. The unknown ceased to be unknown, and the phrase he repeated in his last phase of life is a phrase that perhaps you need to hear today. There is no conductor nor student. There is only the remembrance. You did not come here to discover who you are. You came here to remember who you have always been. Repeat this in silence. You did not come here to discover who you are. You came here to remember who you have always been. And that is exactly why Monroe's method works when it works, and why so many people try alone and fail. Because the method creates nothing. The method removes the noise. The method silences what he called H-band noise, the constant buzz of the rational mind, of worry, of the schedule, of fear, of social performance, of the false identity you were forced to wear since childhood to survive. When this noise drops, the signal appears. Not because the signal was absent, it was there the whole time. You were the one who was deaf. The elements of the method are simple and cruel in their simplicity. Absolute physical stillness, conscious attention, without judgment, without internal commentary, deep relaxation of the body, muscle by muscle, until you almost forget you have a body. Clear intention, formulated before the state deepens, because intention is the rudder of consciousness outside the body. And above all, acceptance of the vibration when it comes. Do not run. Do not retreat. Do not wake up in a fright. Remain. Cross over. Because on the other side of the vibration is exactly what you have been looking for so long. But here is the truth that no one tells you in any video about Monroe. You will not get there alone. Not because you are not capable. You are more capable than you imagine. You will not get there alone because your field is hole-ridden, because your subconscious programming is against you, because 50 years of materialist culture have built inside you a wall of disbelief that needs to be dismantled, brick by brick. And this wall does not fall with reading. It falls with method. It falls with structured practice. It falls with someone guiding you as you cross the fear of your own infinite power. That is exactly what Imán da Prosperidade does in the 28 days of the protocol. It reprograms the field. It seals the leaks. It restores the coherence between intention, identity, and signal. Access is in the first pinned comment. If you have been manifesting for years and stay in the same bank account, the problem is not the universe. The problem is your hole-ridden field. and it can be repaired in 28 days, or you assume it was an excuse all along. Humanity is changing now. There are supporting intelligences closer to you than you imagine. The collective consciousness is in a process of elevation that Monroe observed decades before anyone talked about this on social media. And death, according to everything he documented in 37 years of research, is not a disappearance. It is a transition. You are not just a body. You are not just the personal history you carry. You are not just your traumas. You are not just your fears. You are not just the name on your document. You are a consciousness much larger than the casing can contain. And the goal of this life is not to prove this to anyone. The goal is to remember for yourself, in silence, without needing an audience. Observe your dreams from today on. Write them down the instant you wake up. Listen to your intuition when it speaks low, before the noise of the day drowns out the signal. Remain open to mystery, even when the world calls you naive. Because what Monroe crossed more than 1,000 times is waiting for you on the other side of the next vibration. And this vibration may come tonight, if you allow it. Comment now with the phrase "Eu lembro que eu sempre fui." Write it exactly like that. Because the written word anchors the frequency in the field, and this anchoring is the first step of the protocol. If you want to go beyond commenting, access to Imã da Prosperidade is in the first pinned comment. 28 days to repair the whole written field that held you back until today, or you acknowledge on the 29th day that it was an excuse all along. Robert Monroe spent 37 years exploring the limits of human consciousness, more than 1,000 conscious out-of-body experiences, decades of research, libraries of reports. And at the end of this path, he discovered something simple, almost ridiculous in its simplicity. The final destination was never an unknown place. The final destination was a home that the soul never forgot. You are closer to this home than you think. The door is open, and it is open now.